In this lesson, we're going to go over solving quadratic equations, part 1. This image you see at the top could follow the path or does follow the path of certain quadratic equations. Anything that is thrown, kicked, dropped, falling will follow this type of shape. So they're really practical. They're also practical as they're used to engineer satellites, certain buildings, and even car headlights. Our objectives are we're going to understand the difference between a quadratic expression and an equation, and then we're going to solve quadratic equations by factoring. First, quadratic equations have an equal sign, which means we're usually trying to solve. Equals usually means that we're solving. So without the equal sign, we're typically trying to factor, and with the equal sign, we're typically trying to solve. Don't factor something that says solve, and don't solve something that says factor. Okay, make sure you're following the directions properly. Factoring, however, is a way to solve quadratic equations, or it's one of the methods that we'll go over to solve quadratic equations. And again, we have our standard form, where a is the coefficient of x squared, b is the coefficient of x, and c is the constant. Example 1, solve for x. So the left-hand side would be a quadratic equation if we multiplied it out. In this case, it's already factored for us. Notice these two are being multiplied together. So if this one equals 0, 0 times some number would give us 0, and we'd have a true statement. Or if the second one, x plus 3, were 0, the first one would just be some number, would give us 0. So there's two answers here when solving quadratic equations. So first, this is already factored for us. We take x minus 1 and set it equal to 0. And then we also take x plus 3 and set it equal to 0. Because as I mentioned, if either one of them is 0, the product of the two is going to be 0. And we'll have 0 equals 0, which is what we want. Okay? X minus 1 equals 0, add 1 to both sides, and we get x equals 1. X plus 3 equals 0, subtract 3 from both sides, and we get x equals negative 3. So these are our two answers. If we wanted to check it, we plug it into the original, and we'd have 1 minus 1, 1 plus 3. We want to know, is that equal to 0? 1 minus 1 is 0. Notice that's the term we were wanting to be equal to 0. Times 4 equals 0, 0 equals 0. And you could do the same with negative 3. In the case where the quadratic expression is not factored for us when we're trying to solve, we have to factor it on our own. So whatever way you factor, we're looking for two numbers that multiply to give positive 6 and add to give negative 5. So this case would be x minus 3, x minus 2 equals 0. So again, if x minus 3 were equal to 0, doesn't matter what x minus 2 would be, because 0 times whatever that is would be 0, and we would solve the equation. And same thing for x minus 2. Okay, so we set each of our factors equal to 0 and solve. We'd have x equals 3 and x equals 2. So in this unit, there's a couple of different ways that you may be asked to solve a quadratic equation. The first is when it's already factored for you. You set each factor equal to 0. And the second way is when it's not factored for you and you use factoring in order to solve the equation. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, I'm happy to help.